Psalm 107. Every time I pretty much call us back to the point that this whole psalm is constructed to offer sketches of Hebrew history. It's very symbolic, highly metaphorical, but let's hold this in context. When the psalmist wrote this, he was talking about Hebrew history. Well, why? Because Hebrew history was recorded in order to be instructive. In other words, why study history at all? I mean, it's like, old dead guys and all that. Well, seen it attributed to George Santana, who said, if we refuse to learn from history, we will repeat it. And he's right. God knew that. So that's why, in fact, in my opinion, that's why the first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, were recorded and preserved for us. There are a lot of people that say, well, that's the Old Testament. We're not under the Old Covenant any longer. It doesn't really apply. After the cross and the resurrection, we're now under the New Covenant. And the New Testament should be our guide. That should be our book. Okay, in some ways, okay, I get that. And yet, don't disregard the history of Israel, because it's both informative and instructive. We can learn. Because all of us, I don't care, all of us, and in fact, throughout all of history, when people look into Hebrew history and then look into their own history, there are amazing parallels. And so that's what I want to continue to talk about today. Last time we talked about verse 39, their numbers decreased, and they were humbled by oppression, calamity, and sorrow. Talked about the function of humiliation and the power of humility. Let's just backtrack a teeny bit. Humility is at the top of the list of virtues that God desires from his people. James and Peter both write in their letters that God gives grace to the humble, but he resists the proud. I think there's lots of reasons that this is true and makes sense. One of the reasons is when I'm proud, one of the things that my pride, or the message that my pride tells me is, I'm sufficient. I don't need. I mean, I can take care of me. So you can spend your time with those people who really need. I mean, this was the problem of the Pharisees. We're good. We keep the law. I mean, meticulously. We're not like those others. Jesus had more than a few strong words for that kind of spiritual pride. And I don't think that tendency is going to go away. It has to be, Paul writes, we take every thought captive and make it obedient to Christ. One of the ways that a thought needs to become obedient to Christ is moving from pride to humility. When Israel was doing well, I think one of the factors, and maybe the primary factor, that led them away from their intention and then follow through toward God's commands, His design, was their pride. Everything's going good. We don't need. Come on, we're good. Bank account's healthy, crops are coming in, our numbers are increasing, and it wasn't like one vote and the whole thing turned. No, it was a slide from this humility, realizing left to our own devices, we're going to be in trouble all the time, sliding toward and then finally into a position of pride that says, don't need it, I'm good. Well, their numbers decreased and they were humbled by oppression, calamity, and sorrow. There's a ton of stuff that will humble you. And they probably fit into these three buckets. Oppression, that has to do with having to do what someone else tells you to do or commands you to do. Calamity, hey, bad stuff happens. And then sorrow, it's going to come in everybody's life. Nobody's going to get out of this without sorrow. Okay, and then in verse 40, the psalmist continues, God, He who pours contempt on nobles, made them wander in a trackless waste. Okay, what are we talking about? Well, there is 40 years of wandering in a trackless waste in Hebrew history. and I'm sorry. I think there are seasons where, because of our pride, and when our pride gets busted by the circumstances of life and God's design, we tend to wander. Have you ever had the situation in your life where you find yourself dealing with stuff you've not dealt with before and you don't have a map for? That's a trackless waste, isn't it? And then verse 41, but He lifted the needy out of their affliction and increased their families like flocks. It's like we wander and then we bolt. And then in our pride, our pridefulness catches up to us. And then we have oppression, calamity, and sorrow. The standard political hierarchy gets pushed over. And so God pours contempt on the nobles. But He lifted the needy out of their affliction. Now, I makes sense that part of God's pattern throughout all of history has been a concern for the truly needy. See, here's one of the aspects of pride that I think is most insidious. Pride pushes us to disbelieve that we are needy. Well, those who don't believe they're needy are not interested, this is my experience anyway, are not interested in what could be provided for them. They don't need it. But when I take it to be, when they truly believed that they were needy, then God can step in. Have you ever tried to do something for someone who doesn't believe they're needy? It's difficult to pull off. They don't need They don't need your help. They got this covered. But when we finally come to the end of our own prideful resources and realize I am in need, that's when God steps in. I remember, sorry, got something going here in my throat. I remember an old song I used to sing when I was young. It's me, oh Lord, standing in the need of prayer. Not my brother, not my sister, but it's me, oh Lord, standing in the need of prayer. When, when we realize our need, we open ourselves up to the sufficiency of God. Okay. He lifted the needy out of their affliction and increased their families like flocks. You remember what I talked about, how in Hebrew culture, especially ancient Hebrew culture, the size of your family, the number of children that you had, your household, the size of your household was an indicator of your true wealth. This is a concept that our culture has abandoned. You know, the average size of an American family, I read, is 2.5 children. Now, I could go on a rant about this because mathematically, this is a problem. Our families are not of a size, we're not producing children in a number that can support the aging population. We're in trouble. The whole world is in trouble, in fact, with a few pockets of exception. And the primary pocket being the Muslim world, because they are, a part of their theology is you've got to produce lots and lots of children. That's not part of the Western theology or cultural philosophy anymore. Don't have too many kids. They get expensive. They're going to cut back on your fun. I can even go back to where this basically began, was with the Industrial Revolution, because pre-Industrial Revolution, it was very much to the advantage of a family in an agricultural society to have many, many children, because that was free labor. Now, we don't, most of us, the vast majority of people in the West are not farmers. We don't need free labor. We want free labor for a variety of things, but not in that way. Does this mean that God's absolute will is that there would be large families? Every follower of God would have a huge, large family? No. It's just, take a look though. All right. The families increased like flocks, meaning that was just natural. The upright see and rejoice, but all the wicked shut their mouths. Here's a principle. When God works, the upright are encouraged and rejoice. The wicked, they just don't say anything. Well, my time's up, so anything else on this, we got to come back to. I'll see you for that next time on Soul Care with Stevie.